Okay, good morning. Welcome to today's Consultants Corner. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our facilitator, one of our facilitators for this morning, Dov Horowitz.
Good morning, everybody. Great to see you again. I'm sure at this stage in the game, many of you are regulars and have attended multiple of our sessions. As noted in the emails about registering, that after this week's and in 2 weeks session, we're going to put a little hiatus up for the summer. But as you all know, these are recorded. The links here on the screen, as well as on our website. If you don't have access to that or know where that is, obviously your regional security director can guide you there. But you can always get to the information you want, hear about how we advise to navigate the complex grant processes, and almost as important, and maybe more important, to do an effective installation with those security grants. In season one, we focused heavily at the second half of the season on actual hardening. This season, much more on the actual bid process, and that's where we'll pick it up from today. Broke it down, some of the items that Ilya has spoken about over recent weeks, and even had a guest speaker talk about his experience working directly with Ilya. But we present it to you, we think it's the best way to go forward. So as always, we must state our disclaimer, as a nonprofit providing this guidance through our team members, ourselves, these webinars, what we say is not final. It's what we have learned through working on these grants, working with the agencies, our experience knowing what works and what doesn't. And as always, if you have an official question, or if you really want, that guidance on a kind of gray area or a not sure area, talk to your rep. Your rep is there to help you. It is funding that is allocated to you, and their goal is to help you navigate the processes, navigate the rules, so that you can spend it and get reimbursed in the right way. So we will never be offended. We can even help you word your question, but we just always want to reiterate, it's our best advice as quote unquote consultants to you as you navigate these. So throughout this season, we developed our flow chart, both for the Federal Nonprofit Security Grant Program, NSGP, and for the New York State Securing Communities Against Hate Crimes grant, right? We've developed a very basic overview flow chart for people to understand what the steps are, and then we kind of broke it down over either a session per what we call a phase. Again, these are CSI phases. Your rep will have no idea what you're talking about if you ask them, but from our perspective, this helps put it in that kind of flow chart in terms of the actual high-level requirements. You should always refer back to DHSES materials or DCJS materials if they're your administrative agency. You should always refer back to their materials. We provide some links to either existing webinars and existing materials and exactly where to find it. We want you to make sure you have that all ahead of you. But to help navigate and keep these sessions in a good format and a good flow, so you know where we are, we wanted to present a very basic flow chart. Again, it doesn't cover all the details in a heading, but it shows you where you should be, the timing that should be allocated. Every single step of these is likely, unless you've been through a couple cycles, will take longer than you expect. Even similar steps like putting out your advertisement. You got to make sure it's out there for enough time. You give people enough time to respond to you if you're putting out your response date, for example. But that's another session. Let's not get into that. For today, how we broke it down, as you saw in the email registration, we broke it down to the bid process, part 1 and part 2. And this is kind of in what we call either phase 3/phase 4, depending on which grant, where you do the bidding. Now, the important piece to recognize is what is required from the grant process and what is our recommendations, how to take those requirements and build a solid, comprehensive process so you have a good security installation, you get reimbursed, you have a good experience with your vendors, etc. There's a lot more to that and a lot behind the scenes, and we and Ilya specifically has developed and put together the process, kind of another flow chart from our flow chart to help you get through that. Again, the procurement stuff, the requirements of your grants, what's in your contract, it's kind of laid out in our overview again, but just a high-level overview. But this is how we advise you to get the best out of your projects. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Ilya, and we'll be here for questions at the end of course and follow up with our second session in 2 weeks.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Thank you very much for your attention, for spending this hour with us. Again, to reiterate, this is a recorded webinar. So if you have a need to review this material ever again, or share it with your peers or with members of your team, this is the reason why we do this, is not to just spend an hour and you walk away. And as I've said it all along, that the retention of information, our memory doesn't work in our favor when so much content is presented. So we encourage you to go back to these and review them at your convenience. Also, please take some notes, and hopefully you can then be better enabled and have a better memory and awareness of what we're trying to convey to you. To not scare you with these 6 steps, we're actually going to cover the first 3. Okay, we laid out this process for you. As I've said it in private conversation with one of the clients, use this as a rubric. Use this to guide you through the process. And for some of you, you will notice how not all of these steps you have been thinking about. And even if you have already received grants and spent them on previous projects, maybe some of these steps will appear still quite new to you. That's okay. We're here to answer any questions and then help guide you. And the rest of the CSI team obviously is at your disposal, should you choose to clarify some things. I also appreciate that Dov took the time to put the 3 steps here in bold font. Those are the required steps as part of the NSGP. Any documentation that you prepare for your RFP to send out to the bidders, these 3 particular steps have to have been done in order to justify your project to the government agency that's going to be reviewing it, then later on dispersing the funds to you.
If I can add real quick, Ilya.
Sure.
Making an RFP that you send to your bidders is a requirement. There just really is very, very, very little guidance, if at all, from the agencies on what needs to be in an RFP, right? You have to make your ad. We know that's a requirement. We know you have to evaluate your bids. That's a requirement. But the RFP stuff that Ilya is talking about today, that we've talked about over many sessions in last season, it is a requirement to have, but they just don't give us much guidance. So that's kind of where we're trying to plug in and tell you the best way that we advise to do that.
Perfect. That's great, Dov. Thank you for sharing that. As I said, don't be shy to ask any questions as you review and I guess compare what we're saying to you here with your current status of the project. Without further ado, let me jump to step 1. And again, here, I want to reiterate, we're in sequence now. This is the first step of any project that you're undertaking after you have been awarded a grant, okay? And hopefully you've done it before then, but it's very important. You've seen the slides, those of you who have been following our webinars, who have been joining us on these webinars or have seen recordings, you will note, and please forgive me for being repetitive, but it's very important. The role of a project manager cannot be overstated here. Many a times, everyone on our team has seen projects that have gone in the wrong direction because project management wasn't handled well. These are the few key areas that a good project manager can help monitor and execute on, right? Anybody can really be a project manager as long as a person has good organizational skills and the bandwidth to help with the project. I understand it's not achievable for every single organization, but do talk to us. We'll give you some guidance on how to do this, okay? Even if you have some limited resources.
We see it often, right? We all know this is a multi-year project. And if you include your application, getting your assessment, doing the grant application, we could be talking 4 or 5 year process. We've seen turnover, or we were helping a location, they got through their EHP at this point. We've talked enough about EHP. If you're not familiar, refer to those sessions. They did their EHP, and then a year later, there's a new person at the helm. You say, well, make sure the projects you're doing line up with what was approved in your EHP. And they go, what are you talking about? What's an EHP? So it's critical that if it's not going to be one project manager through the whole way, and that's just one simple example, that there's that transition of documents and requirements, because you've been sitting on these sessions, you know how complex the rules are. Why would people naturally know all these grant rules and requirements? it's just an extra element of why it's so critical to have this kind of one central point managing these projects going forward.
Thank you, Dov, very much for sharing that as well. And I forgot to, again, repeat that. Please, if any questions arise as we go through this, add them in the chat and we'll reply to them during the Q&A, okay? This is now step 2. We would be delighted if you already have a project manager and you're like, guys, stop repeating yourselves. We got it. Everything's great. We have somebody who's taking care of the project. Fantastic. You're far more advanced than a lot of your peers. Let's put it that way. This is where it becomes important to not rush out of the gate. And I hear this phrase, I'm already talking to bidders. Well, how about first understanding what it is that you need to do? And here is where we've shared some of the stories with you before, is there could be an ad, for example, that says, we want fences, video surveillance, access control, barriers, and everything else under the sun. And the assumption is there's going to be 3 bidders, let's say, at a minimum, that will be able to cover the entirety of that type of scope. Well, I can tell you that's impossible. Not a single contractor in the business can deliver all of those solutions to you without having to outsource them and therefore making them more expensive upon delivery to you, okay? Everybody can sell whatever it is that you're looking for, but they're going to be outsourcing it. Therefore, obviously premium rates, premium fees, and whatever, right? And also less responsibility, because then there's finger pointing, right? Somebody installed something, they were an outsourced provider on, working under another company, and it becomes a headache, right? So it's very important to isolate your scopes. Understand that door hardware is done by door hardware contractors. Very rarely, technology integrators can also understand and deliver good solutions for door hardware. That's typically not the case. And a lot of technology integrators will be upfront with you. And sometimes it's even in their contracts. We do not cover any door hardware. And they say door hardware by others. That's a standard phrase in the industry. So to isolate the scopes and then take a look at your award documentation and your EHP, and just to kind of parse through, okay, so where are my windows? What am I doing about my windows? What am I doing about my barriers? And so on and so forth. And again, we're here to give you that guidance. I mean, don't be shy to ask us questions. We can tell you what scope requires to be isolated, right? For example, if you were to say access control, video surveillance, and intrusion detection, you're good. You can have one contractor take care of it for you, okay? Not much of a headache. However, if you try to stick the same contractor with additional pieces of scope, that may become complicated. And vice versa, if there's a door hardware scope that you need to accommodate, right? Technology contractors are not your choice. You should be going with specialty door hardware contractors, right? Fencing and so on as well require individually selected contractors. Therefore, scope isolation and also your project schedule needs to be worked out before you're ready to, as I said before, rush out of the gate, okay? These 3 steps, we urge you to take a deep breath and take a look at what you already have in place. What is it that you're hoping to accommodate as far as the projects? And I've been talking to a facility not so long ago, and for example, they run, some daycare operation, right? So during certain hours, they cannot allow any sort of installation. And also during certain calendar months, they would not be able to accommodate certain types of work on site. So shouldn't that be part of your project schedule? Whenever you have resources available and time available for contractors to work at in certain places on site, you should be guiding them, not the other way around, right? Because contractors would love to do the job more quickly and walk off as soon as possible and pocket the money, right? But they may not do a good job, for one, and secondly, they might disrupt operations of your facility. You certainly don't want that to happen. So this is the time in this step to review your documentation, what you're doing, what kind of scopes are you bidding out, and how are you going to align your project schedule. Again, Dov mentioned before that you're not locked into having to complete these projects within a quarter after the award. You have a little bit more time. And luckily, the granting agencies have been fairly generous with the time periods. And on top of that, we're aware of multiple cases where extensions have been granted. I cannot tell you that they will be granted to each and every one of you should you ask, but it is a process that's in place. So you have some time to get through these questions. This is a good example. We've shown it before. I just want to share it with you one more time of how you isolate scopes, okay? And then how you then align your budgets. It's a nice matrix to use for all sorts of projects that you're hoping to accommodate, right? So that this and any other documentation that you have available, if it's well managed by a good project manager, this becomes institutional history. So no matter whether one person has to start paying attention to some other things and they don't have enough bandwidth for managing these projects and somebody else is stepping in, they will have a lot of this information available and just need to make tweaks rather than starting from scratch again, right? So this is what a typical project schedule would look like, right? You allow some time for, let's say, a bid process, you allow some time for a mobilization, exterior work, interior work, handover, whatever. But you can see, even in something as trivial, it's just a basic example, you can add and delete different things, right? You can see that I'm working with a span of 10 weeks at least, right? And I'm not even tying this to any particular scope, right? In some cases, door hardware can be done in 5 weeks, but electronic security systems may take more than 10 weeks to complete, right? That's the part where you can begin with this schedule, and this should be iterated based on your interaction with the bidders as you go through the bid process with them.
Can you quickly describe mobilization and handover?
Sure. Imagine I awarded a job, right? It doesn't mean that in less than 24 hours after me giving the award to a specific contractor, they will show up on site and begin installing the product. What it means is that upon award, there will have to be a process of coordinating and aligning schedules. So for example, I had a project where the project manager, very solid person, has worked on similar projects before, knows construction industry very well. And he told the contractor, he says, at this juncture, as we just awarded to you, I can't have you on site for at least the next 2 weeks because we have something going on. Okay, so the contractor says, fine, no problem. In this period, right, let's get all the admin out of the way. Let's make sure that we're ready to be on site, because some contractors, in fact, most contractors, will require a percentage in upfront payment, right? So you have to make the process, the payment, before a contractor can commit to certain dates, right? You can obviously negotiate that and have that as part of your schedule. That's what mobilization means. It simply means that you've awarded, you have some admin to take care of before the contractor can start, and the contractor needs to make sure that they've committed resources and technology or whatever hardware that they have available in order to begin installation, okay? And with today's technology supply chains, not everything may be available, right? And it's not up to the contractor. Sometimes they're going to say, well, yeah, we've committed to you to deliver this product, but supply chains are slow, so we're not able to deliver what we hoped we would on time. So it's going to take, let's say, another week or two, right? So that's a little bit of friction that you want to work out during mobilization, and then the work continues afterwards. Your question about handover is it's probably one of the most important pieces of the project, because contractors, they need to have resources available, and they're always spread quite thinly to accommodate multiple clients at different sites. So the same tech that's working on your site will have to go to maybe 2 or 3 other sites in the course of the week, right? They're not going to be able to be at your site throughout the whole week. It's possible that they may be, but in most cases, they have to spread their schedule among different clients. And therefore, sometimes you'll have poor installation, incomplete work, all sorts of things that during the period of handover need to be addressed from a client's comfort perspective, right? So you as the client need to look at how the work is being performed. Hopefully you've been doing, let's say, progress inspections and how things are going and whether they're going to your liking. But it is at that juncture at the end of the project when the contractor raises their hand and says, I'm ready to give the job back to you. So everything's been done. We feel like we're done, right? Well, not so fast. You as the client hold the reins to say whether the project has been completed or not. And therefore, you would go through this process of handover. It doesn't have to be very lengthy, but you do have to inspect what the contractor has provided to you and make sure that it works to your liking. So hopefully that clears this up.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to add, sorry, to reiterate what Ilya is saying, and maybe even go a little further, that even on the mobilization phase, I mean, there could be multiple reasons why a vendor couldn't get to you for a while. If you have a unique type product, Ilya mentioned supply chain. They could be scheduled themselves, just because you have your deadline and the ads and the award was given, they could be booked, especially if they're a high in demand vendor for a month or two. So it's not all on your timetable per se. It's great. You need to have one and you should put it out there what's expected, but especially until you rip that check to them, they're not going to lay out their funds. They got to pay for the hardware that they're going to now, personalize and design and install at your location, but they might not necessarily even have it in stock. So just be mindful that could be immediate, depending on the type of project. It could be months if you're talking specialized door products. So just be very mindful of that kind of thing that goes into your schedule. That's why the phases, some of them are multiple weeks or months. And this is just kind of how you should look at the steps and the process in your project schedule.
Thanks, Dov. Perfect. Here we are. So we have looked at scope isolation. We have created a schedule we're comfortable with. And now we're getting closer to releasing the RFP. Now, we've had multiple questions, especially in the beginning when we started doing these webinars. People were like, what is an RFP? Right? So RFP is request for a proposal, right? I apologize. Early on in these webinars, we made a lot of assumptions. We assumed that most people knew what an RFP was. Hopefully by now you do. And maybe through your project experience, you have learned that term very, very closely. But these are the few bullets that you see before you right now. These are the key elements of a request for a proposal. I could almost number them in sequence, right? So cover letter, obviously, that's not document number one. EHP slides with isolated scope notations is document number two, right? Now, what do I mean by EHP slides? Obviously, this is not the first time I'm saying this, and Dov and I have talked about it repeatedly during previous webinars. EHP slides is part of a document that you've already created in order to be approved by the granting agency. And it annotates. Remember the photos we were showing where the cameras are? And I think I have a couple of examples here. Yeah, remember the middle picture? Those are the diagrams that you want to have as part of your EHP, where you basically show the specific areas of your property, of your building, and also internal corridors and rooms where you want security upgrades and what kind of security upgrades you want, right? And so it obviously makes sense to color code, for example, the video surveillance. Let's say video surveillance is all blue, access control is all red, and intrusion detection is all green, right? So that it's visual, that it's easier for contractors to understand, and also so that they can understand the locations. And guess how contractors price their proposals? They price them based on quantifying all the devices and all the hardware that you want them to install. So they will count the number of cameras, they will count the number of locks, they will count the number of doors, the number of barriers, and what have you, in order to give you a decent proposal. Why? Because they pay unit prices for all of that stuff. And so do you, with obviously contractors markup, right? So that's the part that's very, very important to have. And here's the good news. You, with rare exceptions, already have this documentation available, right? Sometimes you just need to spend a little bit more time to annotate it properly so that you've isolated the scopes. But other than that, that documentation is already on hand in most cases. This is the cover letter. We showed it multiple times before. It obviously can be updated and changed based on your specific project requirements. However, the language we included in the template, and we can make that available to you upon request, is very specific. One of the items here, if you look at mid-page, number 1, do not assume anything. And this is the message you should be giving to contractors. Why don't we want them to assume everything or anything? Is because when they do make assumptions, that costs you money. And that could cause delays, that could cause friction, that could cause whatever, right? And that also helps contractually save you from arguments down the road. So once you award the project, if a contractor comes back and says, well, you never told me about that camera. Well, you never asked about that camera, right? So again, we told you, don't assume anything, right? I assumed that I could run this cable in this corridor. You shouldn't have assumed anything, right? So this is standard language, and the rest of the statements here, standard language that appears in far more comprehensive contracts. We just took that language and tried to make it as commonsensical and free of any sort of exclusive language or exclusive terminology so that you can understand what steps you're going to be undertaking and share that information with the contractors. Okay, so that's the cover letter side, right? I already showed you what the EHP slides look like. Then the general requirements. Obviously, this can be modified. We've iterated this document ourselves multiple times for different projects. So don't assume that this is set in stone. Obviously, if you look in the left column at the very top, it says 3-story building with 1 basement. Well, your facility may look something different. We don't know. So that's all of those things can be updated and changed. Contact details for the main point of contact obviously will be changed, right? Depending on your facility. And then the general requirements for contractors. For example, if you don't have fencing as part of your project, you can remove that line. If you don't have lighting as part of your project, you could remove that line. That's, again, we tried to make this as easy to read through, but this is where I want to pause. We notice, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but we notice how sometimes, even when you put your best effort into a project, you forget to read. And I cannot tell you how many times I've had clients come back to me and say, well, how do I tell my contractor that they need to follow certain rules? I said, we sent it to you. They're like, I never got it. Well, check your email. They check the email, they see it, it's in the inbox. And the feeling is, not on our part, we're like, we understand everybody wears multiple hats, but the feeling is like, how could I have missed it? So many things are happening. It's been sitting there all along. I should have read it. It didn't happen, right? So what I'm saying is, that is where the complexity is. There's a lot of information to process. Therefore, I advocate, and we all advocate for a dedicated project manager. Okay, that's another reason to have one. So that person has that focus and can guide the rest of the team, even though the rest of the team is running on all cylinders in different directions. Dov, you wanted to add something?
I just want to point out, and I know we've shown this document a few times over the last few sessions of what we're actually looking at here. In previous seasons, we talked about a lot more detailed options for RFP documents, short of the 1-pager, the cover letter that Ilya just demonstrated. What this document does is it consolidates a lot of those bigger documents, both for benefit to you, as Ilya was just saying, where that limitation on information and reading can be on you, but also, and more importantly, for the vendor, because this will be a document, once you personalize it, and you can hand it almost like this to your contractor, to your bidders. Because it will happen, like Ilya said, for assumptions. We installed your door, we didn't include a lock. We thought your electrician was going to do that with your access control. And your access control guy's like, well, we just put in the readers and the wiring, but we didn't put the strike in the latch. It happens. So A, B, let's just look at the first bullet, right? How many times do we see invoices? And this is where what Ilya is always reiterating to us, is that how do we compare a bid if we don't actually know what's being priced? And right off the bat, we say, we want that light item price. And how much are you charging us per camera? for the installation, for the DVR, NVR. Your invoices should not be coming as a bulk sum. I don't know how we can digest that. I don't know how anyone can compare that to another bidder. And to be honest, if my kid went to the mall and came back and said, I just spent this much money, we would ask them, well, what'd you buy? What was it? And when we get a $50,000 bid, lump sum for everything they're doing, to me, that's insulting if I get a bid like that. So just remember that little nugget. That's just how we start off. The couple first bullets there are more for the general, for whatever they're bidding on. And then we added in some very specific and more detailed specs, even though it's just a bullet, so that you have this at the ready. We'll talk about at the end how we can get this in other documents.
One other thing we tried to do is that even if you might need additional guidance from us on some of these items, like for example, some of this may read to you, unless you have like a degree in electrical engineering, like PoE, for example, Power over Ethernet. We understand that not all of you know those terms. In this particular case, this is all contractor-facing language. We are trying to help you communicate with contractors and make them responsible for things they should already know. But if you don't tell them, they just will kind of fall by the wayside. And so they can always then turn around and say, well, you never told me this, right? So no, these are the standard practice clauses that are included in nearly every sophisticated contract for any construction job around New York City metro area. So don't worry if something here, you can't understand it because, you might have a degree in law, but you don't know electrical engineering. We got it. We understand that not all of you have that. Just ask us, we'll break this down for you and we'll explain what this means. But in this particular case, these requirements will definitely help you communicate better with contractors and hold them to a higher degree of responsibility and higher degree of quality. Now, this particular slide language can sit on top of your EHP. So it could become, you could add that as page 1. Okay, so that's where it could start. You might throw in a photo of your facility. I've done it recently for a facility. We started out with a photo of facility, but then we said, okay, just a short blurb about what this facility is and what it does, the address and things like that. And then we included this particular language, right? And then we gave a color-coded table of contents to highlight every separate piece of scope. Right now, certain color-coded sections could be bid together, and that's how the client and you all could choose. If let's say it's all technology and it's a video access control and intrusion detection, like I said, that can be bid out together. Fine, but nonetheless, you've color-coded everything. You have these general requirements at the top of your document, and you can then guide the contractors, the potential bidders, through what it is that you're looking to do. Okay, so next, after the general requirements, come the bid forms. Now, Dov and I had a conversation before I included these, and before I even included some other material here. We always strive to simplify things for you. However, in certain cases, we can't make it so simple because it will hurt your project in the end. And here is what I mean. If you use your own bespoke bid forms, which is what we propose, you will likely receive bids that will be comparable, that you will be able to compare apples to apples. If you don't use these bid forms and you don't hold contractors to the same format in which to submit their proposals, you likely will receive, as I said during our other conversation with the client, apples, oranges, kiwis, bananas, and everything else under the sun. Any type of fruit you choose, it'll be part of the pile, okay? That's how contractors, because they have their own formats. You shouldn't assume, remember I said don't assume anything? You shouldn't assume that contractors all use the standardized forms across the industry. That's not the case. One contractor, like Dov said, may give you a lump sum proposal, say, I'll install your everything for $1 million. And that's it. They don't give you any price, any breakdowns, no brands, no nothing, right? If you use your own bid forms, you are mandating a certain standardized format. So when you receive it back, it's all going to be in that format, likely will be in that format. And if it isn't, that should tell you already that maybe this contractor doesn't pay close attention, doesn't know how to produce information to you, even though you gave them a format, right? Maybe they had a hard time following this and they didn't ask you anything before submitting their proposal. All of those things are part of your due diligence before you select your contractor. And this is also how you can demonstrate on the bid scoring matrix later on in the process why you chose certain contractors over others. You know, these are all metrics that you can use to demonstrate why you went with one contractor versus some other contractors. Okay, now, please don't try to remember and take screenshots of anything we're showing to you. We're happy to, first of all, it's going to be recorded, number one. Two, we're happy to give you this documentation. All you need to do is just to ask your regional security manager. They will take a look at this, see what they can share with you. They'll obviously ask you a few questions about where you are in your project, whether you even need this level of information. Sometimes you may have misjudged where you are, and we will give it to you when we feel that it's absolutely necessary for you to move on with your bids, right? But this is a suggested format for the bid forms. And then a lot of people always ask us, well, what do you mean by reference materials? What else should we be adding to the RFP package, right? So remember, it's a package of documents. It's not a single document. It's the cover letter. As I said, it's the bid forms. It's got the EHP with the general requirements. So we're talking about a collection of content that can live as, let's say, 4 or 5 individual documents. Reference materials, particularly for projects that involve work on site and in site buildings, for the most part, are drawings that depict existing conditions at your facility and at your site. So the area surrounding the building, the shell, the outer walls of the building, and then the way the spaces inside are designed. Why is that important? Most contractors, especially if it's related to technology, they need to understand not only where they're going to be putting certain devices. And yes, you're giving them a EHP with a lot of photos and annotations, but they also want to understand how to do, for example, cable runs. If you give them EHP, they will not be able to see that. So yes, they conduct a site visit, I get it, but these reference materials help clear up some of those questions up front so that they don't bombard you with those questions once you've released the RFP and they're working on their proposals. You could also include some other materials that you feel would be useful. I've seen recently where one facility, they had created a narrative with the breakdown of different scopes as part of their coordination with the granting agency. So the grant rep was already reviewed that and they approved it, right? So it makes sense to take that and give it to the contractors because it's all part of your RFP. It's useful and it clearly delineates what your expectations are for every single isolated scope. You can include that if you like, if you have something like that. We're not suggesting that all of you must develop that. You know, if you have it, fantastic. But in particular, if you have certain floor plans, site plans of your facility, your site, fantastic. Please consider adding those as reference materials. Now, we've arrived here at the full workflow. I want to go back to one item here. Let me just jump back, and I apologize. This was an awkward way of me skipping that. Forgive me. The very last bullet. Okay, again, Dov and I had a conversation before we finalized this presentation. And again, we respect that this knowledge builds over time. And even with these 3 steps that make a lot of sense to us, we might have caused you to kind of scratch your head and say, okay, well, how have I done it before? And if I'm doing a current project, am I really aligned with what Dov and Ilya are saying? Again, you can always review this one more time or many times as you want. And you also can ask us questions if anything is unclear. But I want to specifically stay on this contractor selection and bidding. There is a misconception. Everyone that we talk to among your peers assumes that the sooner they start talking to contractors, the better off they'll be. In most cases, that's not true. By engaging with individual contractors before releasing your RFP, and you're only, let's say, you might be seeking informal bids, or informal quotations, or you might be seeking product information. And in this case, particularly, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about product information. Like if you don't know what lock to buy or what camera, what video surveillance system, contractors are not the ones, contrary to popular belief, who you should be approaching. You should be approaching manufacturers. Contractors are the ones you're supposed to be vetting. Okay, so how do you vet contractors before you get on with the rest of the process, or before you release the RFP, right? So there's an organization such as ours that we have seen a bunch of different contractors and in particular, a bunch of different manufacturers do the work. One other client of mine recently went around their community and their township and in their area and asked all executive directors of similar facilities to give them the previous contractors for different types of security technologies and hardware that they worked with. And guess what came back? A list of over 15 or 20 contractors separated by scopes, by everything. And even on that list, other friends of theirs were able to identify which contractors did a good job and which didn't. Okay, so as far as contractors are concerned, ask us, ask your peers. They must have, collectively, I'm sure that we can point you in the right direction. You should be vetting those contractors. You can, take a look at the company. There's a lot of stuff online. And I mentioned it in previous webinars where you could literally take a look at commentary about that contractor's performance. You could also just check with, again, among your peers, hey, have you heard about this contractor before? Have you heard their name? And so on and so forth, before you start reaching out to those contractors directly. And manufacturers. Manufacturers know two things very, very well, much better than contractors. Manufacturers know the deepest points about their product. Okay, so whenever you need to learn something about a product, you should talk to manufacturers. And we can, again, JCRC is here to help you, to point you in the direction of competent manufacturers that are nationally and internationally recognized. And manufacturers also have their local or lists of local contractors who support their products in a specific geography. Okay, it could be Brooklyn, it could be Westchester County, it could be various other areas of the city, right? And they can share with you the lists of contractors that they are working with. Now, there's one wrinkle here, and Dov covered it multiple times. It's when you need the MWBE certification. That's what gets complicated under the state grant. It gets complicated because there's just not a large community of contractors that can step in and do the same type of work. Talk to us, ask us questions. We see that there's a growing number of these contractors, but again, very comparatively, it's tiny. We'll help you as much as we can. Don't feel like you're lost, okay? Just ask us questions. So contractor selection and vetting should be happening at this juncture before you have released the RFP, because how do you know you're releasing the RFP to the right people, right? You can be releasing it and you're going to get a proposal back, but you don't know whether that contractor is shoddy, if they've done some terrible work somewhere else. Right? So you should be doing a little bit of homework about them, who they are, what kind of company, what's their online profile, how do other clients talk about them before you release the RFP to them. So at this point, I think we now have about 10 minutes left. Obviously, we're happy to stay a bit longer. Here's what we've covered so far. We've covered items 1, 2, and 3. If any questions arise, it's a good time for you to now put them in the chat. Next time, we will cover items 4, 5, and 6. Should I call them steps 4, 5, and 6? Okay. At this point, Dov, do you have anything to add, or we can get to the Q&A?
Yeah, sure. No, as we get to Q&A, real quickly, just to reiterate, for next time in 2 weeks, on Tuesday at 10 a.m., we'll cover the slides Ilya was just showing. And then we're going to put a pause again on our Consultants Corner. But like, as we've said many times, our recordings are there. Your regional security director is available, ourselves as well. Just to add on to one of the recent comments Ilya was just making about the contractor vetting and selection, honestly, besides just doing your search online and following the guidance that Ilya said, one of the best moves is talking to your peers. Ilya was talking about. what worked for them, what didn't, how did the experience, that's some of the reason why we bring in some of our guest speakers to these webinars, because sometimes hearing from an organization just like you who went through the process can give you some of the best guidance, the real world guidance, names and vendors, something that we can't do, right? If you've been on our sessions, we clearly state we can't refer vendors, we don't supply lists of vendors. What we have developed and worked with our lawyers and abilities is that once you get to the advertisement stage, right, or grant requirement, we can share it with the different networks and people that we know out there, but we stay out of the process. We really need to stay unaffiliated. At the same time, don't depend on that a lot, solely on us sharing. You should, once you have your ad, you can distribute your ad to the other organizations that your peers told you about or that you found online, right? So be a little aggressive, because you're not going to get a lot of responses to the advertisement, as we've said many times. Okay, without further ado, I think many of you who have been our repeat visitors and work with your RSDs, I think many of you are familiar with Jamie Matos. She's partners with us on the procurement side of it, and much more of what CSI does. But in terms of what we're talking about here, many of you probably have had individual procurement calls with us. So if you have much more technical questions, or you're hitting a bump, or you want some personalized attention, we can give you a one-on-one procurement call with your regional security director. The official way to request that is on our website, right? Just like you requested an assessment from us or a training, you can request procurement guidance. And then Jamie will work with you to get that scheduled, and as well with your regional security director. If it's just an email here or there, your regional security director can probably get you the answer to the questions you have. Now, a lot of the questions on the chat, before we turn it over to Jamie, who's going to run the Q&A for us, a lot of the questions were about getting the documents that we're talking about. First of all, recognize there's the required things you have to do, depending on your grant, right? Please see previous sessions we've talked about, your contract, if you have the federal grant, the EHP, etc. Right, so those you need to do. Then there's the materials that we provide that we intend to not overwhelm you, but to include in your RFP package, the cover letter, the guidance document we talked about today. Those are on our website, but at the same time, we're actually updating our website, and hopefully in a few weeks will be available, and you can always find it there. Or the simplest, smoothest way also is ask your RSD, and then we can get you the documents you need. Now, we showed a few more in-depth documents today, even, and on those sessions, those can be available as well. But like Ilya said, let's see where you are in the process, what your temperature is. If the goal of these sessions are never to overwhelm, but to give you the tools to do a good project. So some might be more appropriate than others. And more importantly, a lot of those were just basic Excel lists. To give you, a lot of people like our bid evaluation example. It's literally an example Excel document I made with a couple of criteria, but we specifically don't want to just give it to you because we want you to personalize it. So if you take it from the session, pause the session, take 5 minutes, and make your bid evaluation form, which we did not talk about today, it's not one of those documents, just an example, you can really develop personalized, simple documents for yourself, for your organization. With that, I'll turn it over to Jamie. Thank you, Ilya, for the information today, but I'll turn it over to Jamie to get through these questions, and we'll be here till we get through the ones that pertain to today's information.
Good morning, everyone. So the first question is, what documents do those pages refer to? And I believe that has to do with the flow chart in the beginning that you were showing.
Yep. So thankfully, we put up the link to DHSES, right? I saw there were some questions about acronyms. Those of you who are familiar, right? The New York State Division of Homeland Security, who is the administrator for most of these grants, not all the grants, and they provide slide decks, recording webinars. So if you follow that link there, that's what we source our information. We don't make this stuff up. We don't pull it out of thin air. We like to source it. That's the link to their documents. And they'll be heavy presentations, 50, 60 slides. So we try to point out where you can find it, but you should 100% be familiar with those. Your rep likely also sent it to you. If you have the grant that's being done by the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services, being that the contract between the states is still similar, a lot of those rules pertain, but just be aware there might be some differences.
Who scopes the work? Do you have to hire an architect?
You are all very lucky because, well, at least with maybe a rare exception, that you all have your EHP ready. EHP is actually, if it's done properly and if it has some visual annotated slides, that is the scope of work. Okay. You can obviously make it more clear. That is what the site visits are for, and that's what additional reference materials are for. We can definitely offline with you individually give you additional guidance. But no, I rarely see architects being called for a project. The only exception is New York City Historic Preservation Commission. And if your facility is a historic landmark, in order to proceed with certain projects, you do need approval. And typically, the architectural firm that specializes in historic preservation would be a good choice, but it's going to cost you money.
If you have the hate crimes grant, which you're not required to do the EHP, developing a similar document is beneficial for the reasons we just said. It's just pictures and labeling. You've thought about where you want some things, get some guidance from your RSD, from maybe someone who you know knows a little security better, to design some similar type documents that you can include with your package.
I recommend for everyone, if you haven't seen what a good slide deck or EHP visual document is, please reach out to us. We'll be able to go over some samples with you. It's not a problem. If you haven't prepared something like this before, do let us know. However, there's a lot of guidance from Dishes, and I think a few other folks. And also, we have gone through EHP ourselves and what it should look like. We've given examples. We have recorded webinars where those were presented. We also had live cases where we reviewed EHPs. All of that information is at your disposal. You just need to either approach us and ask us what you're looking for, or just go to our webinars and review.
On a previous webinar, there was a mention of a site place where we can check to make sure that the company cameras we are receiving is not Chinese and thereby banned. Would it be possible to please share the information?
I believe JCRC-CSI team is subscribed to that service. Giving you that website will not really be helpful for you unless you pay for that subscription. And so you should talk to your regional security manager to get that information.
And I'll add, it doesn't really tell you, it's not like a search. Is this a Chinese manufacturer? What you have to do is, if you got an assessment from us, we document it in your camera surveillance section. What are the banned products and manufacturers? And a little Google searching to make sure that the components of your system aren't from them. But what I would also do is, when you make your RFP, say, hey, if you have a TVA for an assessment from us, include that language and say, hey, we cannot accept products from these banned manufacturers. If you bid with this product, you'll be, disallowed, or we won't go forward with your bid. So make sure that's something you can put in your materials as well, that they need to provide only allowable equipment. But you should be obviously familiar with it.
I just wanted to add, Dov, I apologize for jumping over you here, but in this set of bullets here in the middle, there is a statement here in the general requirements. Contract shall ensure that proposed and installed product systems and other components are not from manufacturers who are banned by the US government. You should put that onus on the contractors who are bidding to you. So you can always do that search, but that's just extra legwork. So you should make sure that you get confirmation from the contractor that no components are banned by the US government.
If we go to those links we sent you for DHSCS in their slides, they should be referring to what the federal government has declared as these manufacturers and products.
That list can be updated in the near future because there are a couple of other companies they're looking at for a potential ban. And that's all just more recent information, and actually affected one of the projects I've been working on, because we mentioned one company. It's called Uniview. They're a video surveillance manufacturer, and that's one of the companies that is being looked at for a potential ban in the near future.
Can you do an ad for all your projects before you establish your RFP document?
You can, and I'm sure Ilya and I can get into the nuances. You can, it won't affect your reimbursement, but then there you start getting your responses. And if you don't have your materials ready, what are you sending them? Even basic level materials, right? So what happens often is people don't get the vendors, because we have to keep relationships with the vendors too to make sure they're responding to everybody. But if they don't hear anything back, these things die off. The vendor loses interest. They think this is a location that they don't want to work with. So it's very valuable to have it ready. And while it may seem like there's a lot here, a lot of this you already have, is already designed for you. Or if you even do a simpler bulleted list, just to make sure you have something going, but you need to have some material you're responding with. They don't know much from your ad. Your ad says we're doing a camera project. What does that mean? 20 cameras, 100 cameras, right? What exterior, interior? So they need more detail. So now, if you want to look at it as that you're doing them at the same time, that could work too, but just be mindful, you want to have it ready likely about the time you're posting it. You really want to have your information ready. Anything else, Ilya? Make sure I didn't step into any landmines.
I appreciate that you've advocated on behalf of the vendors in this particular case, because if I were a vendor and I used to work for one, and I don't hear, oh, actually, I do receive a request for a proposal, and then I ask, okay, so what documentation you have for me to review? And then the client says, stand by. And a week goes by, and 2 weeks go by. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to delete all of your content and move on with my life, because you don't understand, guys. Vendors send out in the course of a month, probably about 60 to 80 proposals. That doesn't mean they convert all of them, okay? Not all of them become projects, but in order to be financially stable, get the revenue they're looking for, they are looking at, let's say, 30% conversion rate, right? That means that 70% of proposals go by the wayside. They propose and it never goes anywhere. But 30% they score, and that's what keeps their revenue. Do you think that it's fair to a vendor to tell them to stand by if they have other things that they got to worry about? And we've heard complaints from vendors who say, we don't hear nothing. We just, we'd love to do business with the community, but we just don't, there's a lot of delays. So that's something that you should keep in mind.
So I realize we're already at 11, but we'll stick through to get through these questions. But if you've got to step away, we understand, but we know there's still some outstanding questions and we want to get to them all. It's part of the intention of our webinars.
So we have 2 more questions. What is an RSD?
Well, an RSD is the core of the Community Security Initiative. If you're newer to our webinars, welcome. The regional security directors are part of our team that is within each borough. We have some are on this call today: Seth Goodstein from Queens, Bill Hayes from Westchester in the Bronx. Sometimes we get them all here. If you have not met your RSD yet, please reach out to CSI Questions. Maybe go to that front slide, Ilya, and we'll get you linked in with your regional security director. They can guide you both through all of the services that CSI, Community Security Initiative, provides, how to request everything from an assessment, a training, to the procurement call that we've talked about doing one-on-one with, or 1-on-3, whatever it may be, with us to help guide you to the next step.
Our grant is for security film and bollards. So we have pictures of the windows to be covered and the sizes of those windows. And we also have a map picture from Google Earth that shows our location for the bollards. Are these items okay to provide to vendors?
Absolutely. Very good thinking on your side. Well done creating those. Make sure that you give them to the vendors, and then clarify and ask vendors to supply to you any questions they have about what you created. There's always room for clarifications, no problem. But the more information, the more clarity you can provide up front, the easier your bid process will be.
What type of help can we expect to receive during a procurement meeting?
That's a great question. Well, we try to do these webinars so that most information that we see as we help people navigate the process, we try to bring it forward in chewable bites. Sometimes it just helps to get that direct consultation to dig in. What grant do you have? What projects are you doing? And the next steps. So we're always focused on what is the next steps, meaning we don't like to throw all the materials at everybody. We don't like to throw even the whole process at everyone. That's why as we navigated even through the main flow chart of the procurement process, we had it covered. It's just too overwhelming for many people, understandably so. This is new to everybody. So we try to really do it in chewable bites, including with the materials that we offer to provide, some on the website, some as needed, because it really, really overwhelms many people. And we have to do that balance. How does CSI really help? And some of this material is stuff we've designed ourselves. We want to be available to the community, but there's a flip side, and I'm answering a question I have privately. So this is to you. A lot of this information can become overwhelming, and if you just follow us blindly and take our information, it can maybe lead you in a different direction. We want everyone to really make it work for themselves, digest it, and move forward. We've worked with hundreds of locations. We've seen what steers people wrong, what gets them what really helps the next step. So that's always our goal. How can we help you get to the next step? We don't think we're going to get you to the finish line. We want you, if you're at A to B, if you're at D to E, in that procurement call, can maybe, if you're stuck somewhere between the webinars, you might even refer to the webinars. Sometimes we'll pull up the slides so we can go through this material together. But it's all that same information, but really geared for you with your RSD to help you get keep moving the process forward.
That was the last question.
We might have missed one here, and I know that because we came in a bit earlier in the reel here, it was to explain some of the columns on the master pricing sheet: field installation, supervision, engineering, and freight. Yes, thank you for noticing that. Just to take a few seconds to answer this, imagine a group of people that are going to come to your site. Not everybody is a tech, not everybody is carrying tools to install things. There will also be a supervisor, or should be. There should be also an engineer that sits in the back office of the installation company and designs things to make sure that all the work gets implemented properly. That should be, kind of behind the scenes. But all of those people, all of those different professionals, they all bill at different hourly rates, and they all bill a certain number of hours, right? So for example, imagine this: you have, let's say, for argument's sake, 50 hours installation and 2 hours of supervision. Is that fair? Good supervision, bad supervision? Okay. Or you have all of the hours in field installation and therefore the rates for that, but like 1 hour of engineering or no time for engineering. Well, without an engineer in-house, how would you be able to deliver a sensible solution to me? You know what I mean? So you should be making contractors explain to you what are all of their representatives doing in order to deliver a good project for you. If all their hours are allocated to field installation, but no supervision and no engineering, which are normal functional roles inside integration firms, then unfortunately, you're not going to get a good implementation. I understand that those things are a bit more nuanced. Come to us with questions when you're ready to send your bids or when you're receiving proposals, okay? We'll help you answer some of those, okay? It's not rocket science, but yes, it is a response to how integration companies are organized, what are their hierarchies, and what kind of people you should be expecting to see on site. We probably can give you a little bit more guidance for your individual projects.
All righty, everybody. Thank you very much. We'll send out the registration link in a couple days to the next session. That'll be our final session for the season. But again, please reach out to Jamie or RSD, and we can continue the conversation if necessary to help you get to the next step.
Thank
care,
you all.
everyone.
Glad to hear from you. Have a nice day.